Hello, boys and girls, and welcome to Movie Goodness, where we examine life through cinema here on the KB Radio Network. I am your host, Kevin Reed, and what you gonna do? What you gonna do when they come for you? Yes, bad boys. It is Bad Boys Day here at the KB Radio Network. A franchise. Yes, a franchise that I never thought I would say back in 1995 when the original film was released. Never thought in a million years that we would get four films out of this series. And here we are. Here we are. Because on June the 7th of this year, 2024, we will get the fourth film in the Bad Boys filmography. Yes, Bad Boys Ride or Die. And I am just as excited for Bad Boys Ride or Die as I was back in 1995 when Bad Boys was released. Uh, it was a phenomenon, at least in my little circle, in many circles, if you look at the box office returns for that movie. But it was like a weird thing because these are two sitcom stars that are going into this action film. Now, it's not out of the realm of possibility. This is nothing new that we've seen comedians in action films, most notably Eddie Murphy. Eddie Murphy on SNL, comedy such as Trading Places and things of that nature. He got cut his teeth in action films, 48 Hours and Beverly Hills Cop. So it's nothing new. But for these two to be in this style of an action film, a buddy cop action film, and when you think of buddy cop action movies, you think of Lethal Weapon, you think of Tango and Cash, movies of that ilk. And Martin Lawrence and Will Smith at the time, you never pictured as action stars, but we got it, and it worked. For some strange reason, it worked, and it worked well enough to get four films out of these two talented men. And I just couldn't be prouder, of these two because I followed their careers from the beginning. I can honestly say I have followed Martin Lawrence's career since he started out, and Will Smith. Before he was Will Smith, he was the Fresh Prince. He was a rapper. And so I followed all of their careers and considered myself a huge fan of these two gentlemen. Even watched their TV shows, their sitcoms at nauseum. Still to this day, I'll watch Martin if it pops on. I'll watch an episode of The Fresh Prince, even though The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air is very dated. It is dated out of this world. Not so much Martin. Martin isn't as dated as you would think. You can still watch that now and picture a revival of that show. Now, they did a revival of Fresh Prince of Bel-Air called Bel-Air, which was on the Peacock. I think it's still there. I watched one season of it and I just couldn't do it. Just couldn't do it. It just didn't have that same, you know what I'm saying? But that's neither here nor there. But in the 90s, it was Martin and Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, must see TV around that era. And to have these two juggernauts come together in a film that is produced by action extraordinaires Jerry Bruckheimer and RIP to Don Simpson, who are known for making these action classics, Top Gun, the aforementioned Beverly Hills Cop 2, Days of Thunder, Crimson Tide, The Rock. All of these awesome action films from the 90s, even in the 80s, late 80s. But to get these two together to make this type of film was going to be a task. So, who do you put over this? Well, you get a young, up and coming director in his first film, his directorial debut. You get Michael Bay. Michael Bay to direct this film. And everybody associated with this movie just went straight to the moon after this. We all know Michael Bay has went on to make some of the best action films of the last 30 years. I mean, come on. You have the Bad Boys films. You have Armageddon, The Rock, Pearl Harbor, the Transformer films. He has done it. Now, you may not like those movies. And trust me, those movies can be dissected. And they should be. But as far as the substance of it all, it is what it is. But the action, Michael Bay cannot be denied. The man is amazing with his action sequences in films. And it all started in a little film called Bad Boys. And so, in honor of the release of the fourth Bad Boys film, we're going to review the previous three, the first three films of this series, and go over them and I guess tell you why I love them so much, why this franchise, I don't know, it just hits different with me. And I can acknowledge the flaws because these movies have flaws. None of these movies, I can give you a spoiler on the ratings. None of these movies are A pluses, but they are so great for what they are. And I love this franchise. I love it. I love it. And you're going to see why. Let's start. No point wasting time. Let's start back in 1995 with Bad Boys, which was directed by Michael Bay in his feature film debut, produced by, as I said before, Jerry Bruckheimer, Don Simpson, and starring Martin Lawrence and Will Smith as two Miami narcotic detectives, Marcus Burnett and Mike Lowry. This film is unique in so many ways, especially if you look at it in 2024 eyes. Top billing for this movie, and I think for all of them, is Martin Lawrence. Because at the time, in 1995, the biggest star out of the two was Martin Lawrence. He was the biggest star. So Martin Lawrence got the top billing in this film, even though we say top billing, but it was equal. Martin Lawrence's name wasn't bigger than Will Smith's here, even though he has more letters in his name. But that's not the case. It's just a little thing that actors and producers do. Some actors want top billing in movies, to show that they're the star of the movie. But this is truly both of their movies, all of them. You really can't give credit to Will Smith or Martin Lawrence in any of these movies. Well, except for the last one, but I'll get to that when we get to uh, 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 Bad Boys for Life. But these first two, it was equal sharing, and this series did a great job of doing that. But this movie, it follows Mike Lowry and Marcus Burnett and their pursuit of this stolen heroin from none other than the police lockup. I think it was $100 million worth of heroin that they had just recovered from this mafia figure or whatever. The biggest bust in their careers, of course, but it has been stolen out of police custody, and they have to recover it in 72 hours before internal affairs come in and shut them down because they believe it was an inside job. Nobody else could have done it other than the police themselves. So they have 72 hours to get this dope. Now, we know that is a movie because you're not going to have a timeline. They're not going to give you 72 hours. They're not going to give you 72 minutes to try to clear your name if that was the case. But you know, every movie, especially around that time, had a ticking time bomb. It had a deadline that you had to meet before the bomb blows up or the virus is released or whatever the case may be, or the hostages are executed and stuff like that. It was always a timeline, um, or a deadline, I should say. Of that was the MacGuffin of the film, and this movie was no different. This movie was originally, it wasn't Will Smith and Martin Lawrence. They weren't the original stars of this movie. This movie was not written for them, believe it or not. This movie was developed and written for Dana Carvey and John Lovitz. Yes, those two. Those two comedians. Dana Carvey, you may know from SNL. Uh, I think most notably, you probably know him from Wayne's World. He was Garth in Wayne's World. John Lovitz is that just deadpan Jewish comedian who is hilarious. They both are hilarious, but I can never see them in this type of film. Now, of course, once they didn't get it and they moved on with Martin Lawrence and Will Smith, a lot of changes were made. It wasn't going to be this. It was, I think it was going to be a completely different film altogether. But at the conception of this idea, it was for Dana Carvey and John Lovitz. Well, they passed on it, but before we got to Will Smith and Martin Lawrence again, it was offered to Arsenio Hall, I believe. Yes, it was Arsenio Hall. He was offered Mike Lowry. He turned it down. He turned it down. And he has said in interviews since then that it was the biggest mistake of his career. he he messed up. He should have took the role, but it went to Will Smith nonetheless. And I think that's nothing against Arsenio Hall. Love him. Love him as a talk show host and all this here, but as a narcotics cop, not so much. But you know, I say that now, but we would never see that version of this movie. Maybe it was going to be a different movie that you would enjoy or that I would enjoy. Um, but what we got, and I love so much, hey, I can't see anybody else in these roles. That's the same thing, just to pivot for a second. That's the same thing as Indiana Jones. Everybody sees Harrison Ford as Indiana Jones. He is Indiana Jones. But initially, he wasn't the first choice. It was Tom Selleck who was initially cast as Indiana Jones. And I think I think Tom Selleck would have killed he would have killed it. He fits it. That every man, that Marlboro man looking, type of dude. He would have killed it with his mustache. But due to the fact he was filming Magnum PI at the time, he couldn't take the role. So by default, it went to Harrison Ford, and the rest, as they say, is history. And I think the world is better for it. But I would have loved to have seen Tom Selleck's interpretation of Indiana Jones, but we'll never know. But same thing here. We got Martin Lawrence and Will Smith, and I think the world is better for it. This movie also stars Tia Leone, Teresa Randall, Joey Pants, and many, many more. This movie is, in my humble opinion, the best Michael Bay film you will ever see. Now, Michael Bay has made some great epic films. I listed them earlier. I mean, Transformers, he has made some epic movies. Can't take that away from him. But as far as everything wrapped up in one, story, acting, action, and fun, everything about movie going is in this movie, and Michael Bay managed to conjure it up, discipline himself because himself, and he hasn't been as disciplined. I know this was his first film, so of course he's not gonna go crazy. He didn't have $200 million to play with in this film, so he had to discipline himself, and I think it worked. Like Michael Bay has made some really good smaller films. I know when you think Michael Bay, you think of Transformers, you think of Armageddon and The Rock and stuff like that. These big budget action films, but think about Pain and Gain. Pain and Gain was a good film. You know, Ambulance was a good film. It was another small movie. Oh my god. Uh, the one about 13 hours. 13 hours was a good film. Those were smaller films. And when he does smaller films, I think he's at his best. He is truly at his best. Um, and here, this was a precursor. He truly was at his best here. We had a perfect mix of action, comedy, drama, and I mean heart, all of it wrapped up in one. He didn't like the script. When he initially signed on, he could not stand the script for this movie. And so he encouraged Martin Lawrence and Will Smith to ad lib, to improvise a lot in this movie. And you could tell. I mean, you can honestly tell. You can tell in this film that they did a lot of improv. And it worked. It worked with their chemistry. You have, as charismatic and charming Will Smith is in every single movie that he's in, I don't think he's ever had better chemistry than he has with Martin Lawrence. And that stretches throughout all of these films. There's no doubt about it. You can feel the way you want to feel about these movies, but at the root of it, the core of these movies is the relationship between Marcus Burnett and Mike Lowry and their chemistry and their banter. They're more like brothers than they are partners or friends. And if that doesn't work, none of these movies work, but they work. And they work well. And they are so funny, so funny. And when they need to turn it on and be serious, they were serious. And the action, without a doubt, is amazing in this film. I loved the final, I guess you say, climactic battle in that old abandoned airplane hangar, where you get the shootout and the explosion of the plane, and the body, the burnt up, blown up body flies out of the other end of it. And the funny part about that is the studio did not want to fund that shot. That little 5 second shot, and I'm probably giving it way too much time. That little shot would have cost like $2 million or something like that. I'm probably uh, exaggerating with the money, but I forgot how much it was to execute that shot. Maybe like $200,000 or $300,000, something like that, to do that shot. And Michael Bay wanted that shot. He needed that shot. So he spent his own money. And he did it with the agreement that if the movie is a hit, Sony would reimburse him that money. And so that was the deal. And so he paid for it out of his own pocket. As a matter of fact, the Porsche that Mike Lowry drives in this movie is Michael Bay's Porsche in real life. Or at least it was his Porsche in real life. Pretty sure he upgraded by now. But that's how tight of a budget this movie was, that they had to go in their own pockets and use their own vehicles for this movie. But he executed the shot, and it is the money shot of the film. And of course, the movie was a hit, but it took him forever to get that money back, even to the point when they was going and do Bad Boys 2. The reason it took so long to do Bad Boys 2 is because Michael Bay did not get his money back for that shot, and he refused to come back to make Bad Boys 2 unless he was reimbursed for that shot. That's why there's a gap, a big gap between Bad Boys and Bad Boys 2, if you was ever wondering. So Yeah, I mean, the action was incredible. The story was incredible. It had heart, comedy, everything you need from a film of this caliber. Bad Boys from 1995 gets a letter grade of an A minus. Yes, this was the best of the first three films. I absolutely love Bad Boys. I rewatched it, of course. I rewatched all of them for this show to do the reviews, and I, I had to watch this one twice because I enjoyed it so much. I absolutely love that movie. So many memories. I think I was 16 when this movie came out, so I couldn't go see it by myself. So I begged my brother to take me to go see it, and he wanted. I didn't think I had to beg too much because he wanted to see it as well, and so but I think I begged him to take me with him, something to that effect. I do. I vaguely remember begging was involved, but that's neither here nor there. He buckled to the pressure, and he he ended up taking me, and I couldn't thank him enough. That movie is still one of the best experiences I've had in a theater. I remember being in that theater and the laughter and the excitement when you see Martin Lawrence shooting a gun or Will Smith running through the streets with his shirt off. And that was just the I think that shot is the reason Will Smith is the superstar that he is today, or at least he was. Hopefully, he'll get back to that point. But he announced himself to the world not because he was all cut up and built and everything, but I think because the women just felt he was sexy because he was running with his shirt wide open in the wind. But it was the money shot, and that was our first rotating 180-degree shot of the standing up as the camera comes around with our two heroes in the heroic pose that is a signature of Michael Bay. And I look, man, everything about that movie, I promise, I cannot get enough of Bad Boys from 1995. It's a classic in my eyes. It truly is. It's borderline flawless to me. Now there are flaws in it that I like to ignore, but whatever. Like the whole plot of Martin Lawrence or Marcus Burnett posing as Mike Lowry for the witness because the witness don't know who they are, what they look like, and it was a mix up. So he has to pretend to be Mike Lowry, while the real Mike Lowry, who is Will Smith, has to go live at his house with his wife and his kids and stuff like that. Now it was great for the comedy aspect of it. That's what set it apart from everything else. Very funny, but very, very silly from a story standpoint that would never happen in real life. Because it's not like he's hiding out in a different state or even city. They're in the same city. So the odds of your wife not knowing that you're close by or your kids or anybody to see you is silly. And I always felt that way since 1995. And when I rewatched it again a couple of days ago, I was like, I still feel that way. That is silly. It is so silly. And the fact at the end of the film, well, getting towards the end of the film, where they find out where the bad guys are and they don't do anything. It goes to the boss, I mean to the bad guys hangout, and then they go back home to go load up, get their weapons and all this other stuff, get their guns and uh getting all suited up. The bad guys follow them home. Why didn't you take them down right there? It was just dumb. That was just a dumb plot. But guess what? I don't care. I don't care. I love this movie. Bad Boys from 1995 gets an A minus. So now we zip almost 10 years, 8 years into the future. Like I said, the reason there was the gap was because of Sony and Michael Bay bumping heads over that little exchange of money. that took place for the first film. But I guess they got it all squared away because in 2003, we finally get the sequel, Bad Boys 2, returning, Michael Bay directing, of course, Will Smith and Martin Lawrence in the title roles of Bad Boys. We also have returning here Teresa Randall and Joey Pants reprising their roles from the previous film. Joining the cast, you have Gabrielle Union, Peter Stormell. This film follows Marcus Burnett and Mike Lowry investigating the flow of illegal drugs going into Miami, in particular ecstasy, which in the early 2000s was a thing. Ecstasy was a thing. I don't know so much now because I don't know. I try to stay away from drugs, so I don't know what's hot or what's popping at this point, but it is what it is. This film is very different from the first film in one reason and one reason alone. Well, not alone, but the biggest difference is that this film had a budget. This film, this film, in comparisons to the first movie, which cost $19 million to make, the first Bad Boys. Bad Boys 2 had a budget of $130 million to produce. That's the budget. I'm not saying the box office. That was the budget of this movie. and that is, I don't think in history. I didn't do the numbers, I didn't do the research. I'm pretty sure you can Google it or whatever. But I think that's probably the biggest jump in a sequel ever as far as budget wise. Budgets tend to go up if a film is successful and the sequel gets a little bump. Like if it costs $20 million for the first film and it's highly successful, yeah, they probably do 25, 30 mil, maybe even 50, depending on how successful it was. You know, I've never seen a film get $120 million bump from the first film. Now, granted, around this time, Will Smith is the biggest star in Hollywood, you know, so I understand that. Martin Lawrence, not so much around this time, but this was his most successful film, at least the follow up to his most successful film. And Michael Bay as well. Michael Bay at this time, he was money. He was money, man. I mean, what we had around this time, this was right before he went into the Transformer assance. But you know, you had The Rock. He did Bad Boys, he did The Rock, then he did Armageddon, then he did Pearl Harbor, and then he jumped into Bad Boys too. So he was very, very successful. Didn't have a bad film. Well, let me take that back. He didn't have a bomb. All of his films were box office success. Whether they were good or not, that's subjective. But yeah. This movie had so much action. And on top of that, this movie was 2.5 hours long. 2.5 hours long. I was like, what are they doing? Is this is this Bad Boys or Gone with the Wind? I don't know why are we sitting here for 2.5 hours? But it was 2.5 hours of explosions, shootouts. I mean, everything led to an action sequence. I mean, we had about 7 action set pieces in this film. I mean, starting at the very beginning all the way to the very end. I mean, we had mansions blowing up. We had shootouts on the highway where we had cars being thrown at other cars, you know, shootouts in a crack house, which was an awesome scene. Just a simple little shootout in a house. But the way Michael Bay used the camera, this is where Michael Bay is a genius. This is where Michael Bay makes his money. You know, to take a simple little shootout in a building, in a house, where there's not enough room to do anything innovative, he found a way to make it innovative with the rotating camera that went from room to room all in one shot. You know, amazing, amazing. I love that shot in that film. You also had conflict of the film, aside from the drugs, you had the conflict of Mike being in a relationship with Marcus' sister, who is played by Gabrielle Union in this film, and them hiding it from Marcus. Uh, on top of the fact that Marcus has filed to get a transfer from that department, mainly because he don't want to be partners with Mike anymore, because of how dangerous their assignments are, how reckless Mike Lowry is, but at the same time, he's just as reckless, it's crazy, but he has to thank for his family, and there's that element as well. This movie has a lot going on, but it's not convoluted in a way. It's not too much, whereas you sit back and you're like, man, I don't understand what's going on. I don't follow what's happening in this story. You follow. It's pretty simple. Everything that's going on is simple. It's just a lot that's going on. There's some unbelievable things in here as well. Like I said, none of these movies are perfect. None of them. But they are what they are. They are simply action films that are there to entertain. They are popcorn films. And this was indeed the biggest popcorn film of that year, 2003. Um, this movie, even though it was entertaining, wasn't as good as that first film. It didn't have that same magic. It didn't have that same charm. It was a lot of ridiculousness. It's just completely ridiculous. Now, I know it was some ridiculousness in the first film, but it was kind of reserved ridiculousness. Whereas this movie, it was like the faucet was turned all the way on, and it wasn't a drip. It was full blown, just blasting out of the faucet. And a lot of it was kind of jarring, but it was entertaining. They found a way to keep you entertained, but story wise, it was just a lot, man. A lot that you had to just run with, that you truly had to suspend disbelief in so many ways. Uh, the recklessness, the disregard for human life, and I'm talking about from Mike Lowry and Marcus Burnett. They didn't care. It was just complete recklessness from these guys, and they are the best cops in Miami. They're the top cops in Miami, which kind of scares you in a way. It's scary. Uh, but in any event, despite all that, if you turn your brain off and just enjoy the action and the excitement and the comedy, this movie is still funny. Of course, the chemistry between Martin Lawrence and Will Smith is undeniable. Uh, I, I mean, you can't go wrong with Bad Boys 2. Bad Boys 2 from 2003 gets a letter grade of a B. Yeah, it was good. It was still good, just not as good as the first. Even though it was longer and more expensive and had more action, more explosions, more gunfights, more blood. This was very gory, by the way, very gory. It was borderline horror movie at some points, but it was still a good time in the theater. Now, I mentioned earlier about the gap between Bad Boys 1 and Bad Boys 2. I think I said, what, 7, 8 years between those two films? Well, the gap between Bad Boys 2 and Bad Boys for Life said, hold my beer. It took us 17 years to get the third film in this franchise. 17 years to get Bad Boys for Life. Now, a lot of this was due to scheduling conflicts and uh, directors stepping away, writers stepping away, and uh, other factors that went into this film not getting off the ground. But Sony, Martin Lawrence, and Will Smith did want to make another Bad Boys. Even Michael Bay, as late as 2008, he had wanted to make Bad Boys 3. And he loved the franchise. Because that's where he started, and he always felt he would never forget where he came from, and blah blah blah. And he wanted to return, but he knew that it was going to be tough. And he stated in an interview that he do want to direct, and this is back in June of 2008. He said he would love to direct Bad Boys for Life, but the biggest obstacle is the cost, mainly because of his salary and Will Smith's salary, which at the time was the highest salaries in the film industry. As I said before, Will Smith was the biggest star in Hollywood around this time. Uh, every movie he made came out 4th of July weekend and made buku money. He was the guy. And Michael Bay, back in 2008, 2008, I think he was fresh off of the first Transformers film. And so he was in high demand as well. I think around that time he was also being considered for Superman. And if I'm not mistaken, his salary is the reason he didn't make a Superman movie. So he is one of the highest paid directors in Hollywood. So he their demands is what really hampered it around that time. So just a year later, Sony Pictures hired Peter Craig to write the screenplay for Bad Boys 3. Now, Peter Craig has went on to write some very good films. The Town, that Ben Affleck film, amazing movie. He also not directed, but he wrote The Batman, with Robert Pattinson, which is one of my favorite Batman films, and as well as Top Gun Maverick as well. So he knows a thing or two about a thing or two. And he was hired to write the screenplay for Bad Boys 3. And now in February of 2011, Martin Lawrence reiterated that the film was in development. Okay, and we get all the way to June of 2014. Jerry Bruckheimer announced that another screenwriter had been hired to work on the storyline for Bad Boys 3. 2 months later, Martin Lawrence said that the script had been written and parts had been cast. So around this time, we were like, okay, we finally going to get the third film. Then in June of 2015, director Joe Callahan was in early talks to write and possibly direct Bad Boys 3. Joe Callahan, he directed Narc, Smoking Aces, the A-Team film, which, it's but I like Joe Callahan. I think, especially his writing, he has some exceptional films. If you ever watched any of his films, and I was super excited for him taking over the reins. I really wanted Michael Bay back, but if we were going to get somebody else, Joe Callahan would be a worthy successor. But 2 months later, Sony Pictures announced that Bad Boys 3 would be released in 2017. And then the wheels fell off. Joe Callahan, he had left the project due to quote unquote scheduling conflicts. But we found out later in interviews that Joe Callahan and Will Smith didn't see eye to eye. He basically said that Will Smith wanted to be the star, whereas Joe Callahan wanted them both to be the star, both being Martin Lawrence and Will Smith, because it's called Bad Boys, not Bad Boy and his partner. And so he was, they couldn't get on the same page, so he left the project. So we fast forward again, and finally, in January of 2018, it was announced that Adil and Barrel, hope I'm saying their names right, had signed on to direct the film. And finally, we went into production on the third Bad Boys film. And we finally got it in 2020, Bad Boys for Life, which I was like, man, if they were going to do 4 films, this was what I was saying back then. I said if they were gonna do like 4 films, that would have been the perfect title for the fourth film, Bad Boys 4 Life. You know, they could have used the four. But I guess they weren't thinking that far ahead. Let's just get this one out at the time. And we all know what happened in 2020, the year that will live in infamy, the dreaded COVID-19 virus that swept the world. And this was, I think, one of the last movies to be released in theaters right before the pandemic went crazy. Everything shut down in March of 2020, if I'm not mistaken. Actually, it was because it was a week before my birthday. I'll never forget it. Everything shut down. And so it was in March of 2020. This film came out in January of 2020. And surprisingly enough, this movie was the biggest moneymaker of that year by default because no other film came out after March of that year. And so Bad Boys for Life holds the title for being the most successful film of 2020. And just like the first film, I'm sorry, the second film uh was made for $130 million. Instead of boosting the budget up like they normally do with sequels, they kind of bumped it down a tad. This movie was made for $90 million, and Bad Boys for Life uh once again stars Will Smith and Martin Lawrence. And this is the first time I'm saying it in that order because that's the order this film is billed as. Martin Lawrence is not top billing on this film. It was Will Smith for obvious reasons that we'll go over during this review. But returning in this film, you have Teresa Randall, Joey Pants. Joining the cast, you have Vanessa Hudson, Alexander Ludwig, Kate Del Castillo, who, fun fact, was in a relationship with El Chapo in real life. Just wanted to throw that out there. But this go around, Bad Boys for Life, Miami detectives Mike Lowry and Marcus Burnett investigate a string of murders tied to Lowry's troubled past. This is my least favorite of the three. Reason being, this wasn't Bad Boys to me. This was more of a Mike Lowry movie. This movie centered around Mike Lowry. It was all about Will Smith. And this kind of, once I saw this movie, I immediately thought about Carnahan's comments about him and Will Smith butting heads at the development of this movie while he left the project because he wanted to make it more about his character. And once I saw the movie, I was like, okay, he's right. He was right. It was all about Will Smith. Martin Lawrence, it took a big backseat in this film. He really uh, number one, he let himself go. Martin Lawrence, God bless him, love him to death. But physically, he didn't age well. In looking at the trailer for Bad Boys Ride or Die, is the same. He looks even worse. And I say worse, he just looked bigger, in comparisons to the first film. Not granted that came out 30 years ago, but yet and still it's Will Smith still looks like Will Smith, whereas Martin Lawrence, he looks 30 years older. But in this particular film, Bad Boys for Life, he really took a backseat. His character did nothing. Now, he had parts, he had his funny moments in it, and he did contribute to the story, but it felt more of a supporting character versus a partnership as they did in the first two films. This really, I don't know, it just bothered me. And especially watching it recently, it bothered me even more. It wasn't Bad Boys. It was the Mike Lowry movie. It was Bad Boy. And it hurt the film. Now, the film was still good. It was a good movie, but it wasn't a Bad Boys movie. It didn't have that same flavor as the first two films. And And that's saying a lot because the second film didn't have the flavor of the first film, but it really dropped off in this movie. Uh, you immediately felt the absence of Michael Bay in this film. Michael Bay's direction is so unique to this franchise that if someone else takes it over, it's gonna show, and it showed in this film. Shining example of that, Jurassic Park, not Jurassic World, but Jurassic Park. Those first three films, whereas the first two films were directed by Steven Spielberg, and you felt it. You know, Steven Spielberg had his hands in that. The third film, Jurassic Park 3, was directed by Joe Johnson, and you felt the difference. It was not as good, it wasn't as crisp, and it didn't have the same flavor as the first two films. And in Bad Boys for Life, it didn't have that same flavor. It didn't have that magic. Didn't have the action set pieces that we're used to in this franchise. Even going dating back to 1995 with a smaller budget, somewhat of a low budget action film that it was, it still managed to feel like a big blockbuster action film. This film didn't have that feel. Uh, the final battle in here had a big action set piece, but it didn't have that same pizzazz as the previous two films. With all that being said, uh, Adil and Bilal taking over for Michael Bay, I think they did a good job. It wasn't bad. It just didn't have the same flavor, and they really made it their own. I guess you can't really argue with it. You know, they didn't try to copy Michael Bay. You know, they didn't try to do the same things and shoot certain things the same way, with the exception of one thing. They did do the rotating 180 shot of Martin Lawrence and Will Smith standing up, and you get that hero shot, that epic hero shot that is in every single Michael Bay film. They did copy that, but aside from that, it was their film, and I respect them for that. You know, and I respect the fact that they tried something different and new with this film, even though it didn't all the way work. Uh, it still managed at moments to give us a glimmer of Bad Boys, you know, that we know and love. This is an exciting film. The story was a good story. It just wasn't a Bad Boy story. I like the element of Mike Lowry having this checkered past, and uh, you know, having this, well, I can spoil it. It don't matter. End up having a son who's this insane killer. I mean, a beast of a killer who is out to kill not only Mike Lowry but everybody that Mike Lowry loves, with the exception of Marcus Burnett. That was never an option for this killer. And I was like, well, they so close. How do you not go after him? Now that would have made the story a little more interesting to me. That Mike Lowry would have to protect Marcus from this killer. You know, that would shine a light on their relationship even more. That's the direction I would have took, but that's not the direction that this film took. And aside from that, how didn't Marcus know about this kid? Now, not only have they been partners for a long time, ever since they joined the force, but you know, going by Bad Boys 2, they were friends in high school. Actually, in Bad Boys, the first Bad Boys, their relationship goes all the way back to when they were kids. They've been friends. So how did this slip through the cracks? I can see uh Mike Lowry hiding the relationship with Marcus's sister. I can see him getting through that. But how do you hide this? Now, not so much the son, but the fact that Mike Lowry was this undercover cop and he got tangled up with this cartel wife and they end up having a kid together. Come on. None of that was ever talked about in any other film. But whatever. you know, whatever. Did I have fun with this film though? I did. It was fun. It had its moments, as I said before. The chemistry was there. Of course, these two were born to play these roles. They were born to star in this film together, and I often wondered why they never starred in anything else together. Yes, they've been in three Bad Boys, well, four now together. But I mean, aside from the Bad Boys franchise, it would have been nice to see them in different projects together. For instance, like Gene Wilder and Richard Pryor. They starred in a lot of movies together. They weren't all connected. They were just in different movies together. They paired up together. It would have been nice to see them in other projects. It didn't have to be action. They could have teamed up in a comedy film or, like Uptown Saturday Night remake or something like that of that nature. You know what I'm saying? But who knows? They probably still could, but I think I don't know. I Who knows what the future holds? It may be, but I, this is what it is. But I would have loved that scene. But yes, the chemistry was there. Uh, it, the death in here with the captain, Joey Pants, uh, his character, who we've loved for the entire franchise, to be killed off here. I know we needed a death here to have an emotional toll, but it just didn't. It didn't really have the effect. It was supposed to be heartbreaking because he's been there since the beginning as well. So he's, a unofficial member of the Bad Boys crew. So it was supposed to have a more uh devastating impact, but it didn't have that, and which was upsetting. Um, there was some fun action in it. Oh, Michael Bay did make a cameo in here in an acting role. A short little cameo. I thought that was funny. I think he also produced this, co-produced it, I should say. So he did have a hand in this film in kind of a roundabout way, but he didn't direct it. But anyways, yeah, the action that was in it was pretty interesting. The supporting characters, that ammo team, that young group of I guess you could say SWAT members or super SWAT team that that teams up with them. I think that was a nice element, to mix in some young blood with these old lions here. That was interesting. I hope to see more of them in this new film. But yeah, all that was good. The story, as I said, a little convoluted, but you know, it could have been told better. I'll just put it that way. It could have been told better, but unfortunately, this is what we got. But it was decent enough to warrant a sequel that we're thankfully getting today on in theaters. Bad Boys Ride or Die. But overall, it's the least satisfying film in the franchise so far. Hopefully, it stays there with this new one uh, going back to form. But as it stands right now, it's probably the worst in the franchise. Bad Boys for Life, released in 2020, gets a letter grade of a C minus. Yeah, it was very weak, very very weak. It's one of those films that you watch. Like when I watched it in theaters when it came out, I enjoyed it that first time. I was like, all right, yeah, another Bad Boys. But after the infatuation with the franchise wore out, and I saw it again on TV, I was like, it's not as good as I remember it. Then when I actually sat down and watched it, and I watched bits and pieces of it since then, if it popped up on TV or whatever, never from beginning to end until a couple of days ago for the first time in about 4 years. And this go around, I was like, oh no, this is not good. This is not a good movie. Oh man, it is not a good movie, but it was bound to happen. You can't win them all, but this was indeed the weaker one in the group. But there's hope. There's hope in the horizon with Bad Boys Ride or Die, which is in theaters right now at the time of the release of this episode. I hope they go back to form. And it looks like it. In the trailer, it looks like it. The trailer for that film made me laugh more than Bad Boys for Life did in its entirety. So that gives me a lot of hope, going forward. And when you go see films like this, especially this franchise, you go for the chemistry between Martin Lawrence and Will Smith. You go for the action and you go for the comedy. And if they can deliver on those three elements, you got a winner. I'm not worried about, oh man, is this going to have a twist at the end? A Sixth Sense type twist at the end? Or is it going to wow me with his philosophical way of thinking or speaking to me through the screen? I don't care about all that. I go there for the action, for the comedy, and for these two wonderful actors bouncing off of one another. So that's what I'm looking forward to with the new one. But that is the review of these three films. Yes, there was also a TV show kind of spun off from this as well in between part 2 and part 3, and it was LA's Finest, which aired in I think 2019 to 2022 or 2020. It only lasted 2 seasons, and it was basically based off of Marcus Burnett's sister, and Gabrielle Union reprised her role. I think Jessica Alba was in the cast as well. I never watched one episode of that show. I never watched it because it didn't come on normal television. It came on, I forgot what channel it came on, but I didn't have the channel at the time, so I never got to watch it. I think it ended up coming on BET or something like that. I forgot, but it didn't appeal to me. I watched the trailer for it. I'm like, okay, I'll check it out. I liked Gabrielle Union's character in that in Bad Boys 2, and it didn't work. It just, the trailer didn't do it. And Jessica Alba, God bless her, is not the strongest of actresses. So I didn't even give it a shot, to be fair with you. So I can't tell you if it was good or bad. But judging by the fact it only lasted 2 seasons, that tells you all you need to know. But it is what it is. But those and if you watch that TV show, I would like to know what you thought of it. You can email the show. I would love to know what that show was about, because I can't find no reviews. Nobody talked about it or nothing. So I don't know what to think of it. But yeah, are you excited for this new Bad Boys film? How do you feel? Are you a fan of this franchise? Do you put it up there with action franchises? The big action franchises like I, I'm gonna say Die Hard, but it ain't up there with Die Hard. But like the Die Hard franchise or the Lethal Weapon franchises, stuff of that, action franchises. Do you set it up there with that? I mean, you can make an argument. You can honestly make an argument that this is one of the most successful action comedy franchises in history. Your Beverly Hills Cop franchise, which we're getting another one of those coming next month. I can't wait for. And so it's a very successful franchise, very good for what it is, and I deeply enjoy it. But I would love to know your thoughts of Bad Boys as a whole. Email the show, kbradiopodcast@gmail.com. You can also search for this show on all social media platforms. Just search for the KB Radio Network. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the KB Radio Network channel on YouTube and like this video if you don't mind. Don't forget about the 5 stars, the reviews, and sharing this show. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, wherever you are currently listening to movie goodness here on the KB Radio Network. Everybody, thank you for joining me as we went back and reviewed the first 3 films in the Bad Boys film franchise. Can't wait for part 4. Be on the lookout for that review this weekend. Can't wait to speak to you then. I want you all to know that I love you. Continue to love everyone. And until we speak again, you all be blessed.